Thank you for joining us today as we go through the Locating Professional Resources for Teaching assignment, with our focus today on behavioral and social learning. My name is Jeffrey Schultz, and it's my privilege to welcome you today. Let's begin. I want to begin our time today with an introduction in a classroom scenario. You are teaching in your classroom when a student begins to act out. This has been a challenge in the past, but you have often been able to work with the student and things begin to get back on track. There's been more outbursts over the last few weeks, but things have generally been okay. Today is not that day. Instead of responding to your concern with a positive response, the student begins to act out more and has now made a tremendous disturbance in the classroom. You call for assistance from administration, and the student is removed from the classroom. This scenario may not be unfamiliar to you. While there are many antecedents or triggers that may see the escalation of this behavior, I wanted to begin with one possible focus that could be a cause in this scenario: negative reinforcement. One of the major attributes of the behavioral learning theory, negative reinforcement, is a stimulus whose removal increases the likelihood that the response will recur. It's the encouragement of a particular behavior by removing a stimulus. Many times we think of the terms positive and negative and assume that it means good and bad. Ultimately, as we reflect on these forms of reinforcement, it means the presence or non-presence of a stimuli in the midst of the situation at hand. In reflecting on negative reinforcement, escape is when a response increases in frequency because that response results in the removal of an aversive condition. In the introductory scenario, the student has come to understand that if they act in this negative manner, they will remove the unpleasant obstacle in front of them. In this scenario, it would be schoolwork. Other behavioral theories would call this an escape function of behavior, and this is seen firsthand by educators in classrooms all around the world. The student wants to escape from the task at hand, and as educators, we often allow ourselves to be the catalyst for this conditioned behavior. In reflecting on the behavioral learning theory as a current trend in education, there are many influential figures whose research has brought out this focus on behavioral and social learning. One of the most influential is Ivan Pavlov, whose focus on classical conditioning has illuminated some very important reminders that I would like to discuss in our time together. When one says the name Pavlov, many think back to his most famous experimentation with dogs. For those who are unfamiliar, Pavlov had a group of dogs and conditioned them to act in certain ways when it was time to eat. A group of dogs would hear a bell and they would be given food, a positive or desired stimuli. After time, the bell would be rung and the dogs had associated that sound with the food. They would salivate in anticipation of the food that they believed was coming. Pavlov predicted the dogs would salivate in response to the food placed in front of them, but he noticed that his dogs would begin to salivate whenever they heard the footsteps of his assistant who was bringing them the food. An additional study that I wanted to share in our time together was found through Jay Gottfried and his colleagues at University College in London, where they wanted to see this experiment replicated. And as such, they trained 13 subjects to anticipate either having peanut butter or vanilla ice cream when they saw a picture of that item. The thought was that if they saw that picture, they would desire that item after having had that item earlier. The two-part experiment failed in that the subjects no longer desired the image, the item that they had already had. Rather, they wanted something that they had not received. Regardless of their results in the study, however, the study did clearly identify the importance of how we as humans respond to stimuli. While human beings are not dogs and are not as easily trained as dogs, we are trained nevertheless to respond to stimuli. For every stimulus, there is a response. In the scenario in our introduction, the student stimulus was being in a classroom that they didn't want to be in. They didn't want to do work. And as such, the response was to avoid that responsibility through acting out. In reflecting on this trend, I want to ask some reflection questions that I hope will assist us as educators in evaluating our current methods and stimuli in the classroom and how they lend themselves to the responses that we see each day. Think of a behavior problem that you are currently encountering or have encountered in the past. What is the usual consequence for this action? Does this consequence involve removal of an unwanted stimuli, such as classwork, homework, or the addition of a positive stimuli, snack, free choice time, iPad time? Do you think that this theory of behavior conditioning can be applied to all unwanted behavior situations in the classroom setting? Why or why not? Another area of discussion when reflecting on this topic of social learning is what is the motivation for students to work through areas of difficulty. For some, it may be not having to do homework, which is an example of negative reinforcement. For others, it may be a piece of candy, which would be positive reinforcement for completing the assignment that they were asked to do. When I reflect on my own personal educational experiences, I have fond memories of my teachers thinking outside of the box. I think back and how they encouraged myself and my peers to complete the task at hand with various reinforcement. Reinforcement is seen every day as a teacher. It can be simple, such as a sticker on a test, or it can be complex, such as a class working towards improvement on an assessment score. The key is knowing one's students and what will motivate them towards success. In addition, you must also be aware if you are unwittingly reinforcing undesired behaviors, such as the introductions scenario. As you reflect on your own classroom management, I hope that this presentation has brought to your attention some current settings in which you may need to adjust your own personal response. In doing so, we can be more successful in teaching academics, but also in teaching positive behaviors. While it is not always easy to recognize our shortcomings, in doing so, we open up new opportunities for growth in ourselves and in our students. In conclusion, let's take one final look at the scenario from our introduction. The student's behavior was being reinforced by an escape from the classwork. The teacher and the administration were able to work together to come up with an alternative plan for when this student begins to display some of these behaviors. The next time this happened, the class and teacher moved to another location, and administration stayed with that student in the classroom to complete the assignment. This allowed learning to continue for the other students, but removed the reinforcement of escape for the one. Every situation is different, and as such, needs to be evaluated in a flexible manner. Through reflection on some of these aspects of behavioral and social learning, one will be better equipped for any possible obstacles faced in the classroom.